Discover the unexpected journey. A cowboy's incredible act left a homeless Apache speechless. Jake tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the worn leather creaking under the pressure of his calloused hands. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windshield of his truck as he made his way to the local market. The rumbles of the engine were almost drowned out by the cacophony of his thoughts. Dwindling cattle prices, the bank's oppressive deadline looming over him like a gunfighter's glare, and the weight of his grandfather's legacy tugging at his heart. Each day felt like a boxing match he was losing, and with every mile he felt more cornered. Spotting a figure on the roadside, Jake instinctively slowed. Tomahawk, a homeless Apache man, sat hunched with life etched into the lines of his weathered face. In that moment, Jake's internal struggle morphed into a sudden resolve. He parked the truck and walked over, stomach twisting at the notion of finding solace in shared humanity. He handed Tomahawk half of his sandwich, an act of kindness that felt revolutionary in a world so steeped in hardship. As they ate, Jake's heart raced, pounding against his ribs like the hooves of a startled horse. Tomahawk shared stories of his life, an artist once, now a vagabond whose spirit had been stifled by injustice. Each word struck a nerve in Jake. He thought of his mother, her frail frame a shadow of the robust woman he had known. His dreams, his responsibilities, and Tomahawk's quiet dignity wove together in a fabric of shared adversity that almost made him dizzy. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, the news came. Jake's mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Time shifted, it crawled, then sped. His heart thudded in his chest as he envisioned her weak smile, the frailty beneath her skin. He felt the walls of his world constricting around him, desperate for air, but the weight of the ranch sank deeper. Family loyalty pulled at him, wrestling against the reality of failing cattle prices, raking his spirit raw. Jake felt like he was sinking, drowning in a torrent of thoughts, the collective memories of his family, his obligations, and the harsh truth that loomed over the ranch. Should he drive to her bedside, or stay and fight to save everything his grandfather had built? The decision felt like a merciless standoff with no easy answers. As days passed, the burden only deepened. Returning to Tomahawk felt instinctive, but also reckless. Their conversations morphed into something profound against the backdrop of disappointment that colored Jake's daily existence. Tomahawk offered wisdom that resonated within Jake's struggling heart, words that ignited a newfound determination he had hardly thought possible. Yet with that flame came the stark visibility of the deep-seated corruption plaguing their hometown, where greed flourished and family legacies crumbled. He grappled with the uncomfortable truths of privilege and history, his upbringing, the subtext of Tomahawk's existence. It all pressed heavily against his chest. In those moments of reckoning, Jake stared into the abyss, questioning if he was ready to confront his demons, to stand shoulder to shoulder with Tomahawk. The specter of his family's honor loomed, urging him forward, yet the land felt increasingly like shifting sand beneath his feet. Would he uncover the tenacity to fight for what he believed in, or watch it all slip away? The tension of unresolved choices wrapped around him, echoing the unsaid question of whether he could forge a bond strong enough to challenge the storm around them. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With a heart heavy with uncertainty, Jake braced himself for what was yet to come. Moments hung in the balance, loaded with decisions, veering towards confrontation. The grace of his family's heritage and the bitter taste of societal injustice presented a crossroads he could no longer ignore. Torn, he could feel the thrill of danger and the spark of hope pushing him toward an inevitable but unknown conclusion. What would he choose? Would he allow despair to claim victory, or would he find strength in the friendship forged in hardship? The sun dipped low, wrapping them in shadows as the world around them held its breath, waiting. Jake sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the air heavy with unshed tears and unspoken fears. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him, cooling as he replayed the conversations with Tomahawk in his mind. each word replayed like a haunting melody, speaking of courage and perseverance, yet laden with the weight of their harsh reality. The ghost of his mother's smile danced before him, merging with visions of the ranch, his legacy, slipping through his fingers like so much sand. Getting up from the table, he walked over to the window, staring out at the dry, rugged landscape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that mirrored the turmoil within him. He felt like a ship caught in a storm, tossed between the shoreline of family loyalty and the turbulent waters of moral responsibility. He could either stay the course, clinging to the known, or embark on an unpredictable journey that could lead to redemption or ruin. Jake's thoughts flickered towards Tomahawk. The Apache stories had sparked a flicker of hope within him, a notion that perhaps he could unearth his unique voice amidst the chaos, a way to intertwine his fate with Tomahawk's. Each story they had shared became a thread, and he suddenly realized he needed to weave them into his own narrative. If he wanted to confront the injustice that had plagued their town, he would have to find his footing first. Could his grandfather's lessons extend beyond cattle ranching to encompass fighting for truth and justice? Determination settled in his chest, hot and solid. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. Jake grabbed his work jacket, the fabric rough against his skin but familiar, much like the comforting weight of responsibility he felt. He had to speak to Tomahawk again, to learn more than just survival and artistry. He needed to tap into the heart of a man who had faced struggle yet retained his spirit. What wisdom could Tomahawk share about resilience in the face of overwhelming odds? Jake felt a surge of conviction. After stepping out into the evening air, he drove towards the town, the familiar landscape morphing into something new, a battleground against complacency. Each bump in the dirt road mirrored the jarring thoughts of self-doubt. What if he failed? What if their discussions led to nothing but more sorrow? But the alternative, remaining passive while everything he held dear crumbled, felt far worse. When he arrived at the makeshift camp where Tomahawk resided, night had fallen, wrapping the world in an inky blackness that was both disconcerting and liberating. The campfire flickered, casting a warm glow that beckoned him closer. Tomahawk was there, arranging his sparse belongings silhouetted against the firelight. "Jake," the Apache called out, a slight smile illuminating his features. "You returned." Jake stepped into the light, emotions tangling within him. "I need to talk to you. I feel like I'm just walking in circles, lost. I want to understand how to stand up for what's right. I want to understand how to fight for my family's legacy, not just as a rancher, but as a man of integrity." Tomahawk's expression shifted, the calm wisdom in his eyes urging Jake to continue. "You're here. Tell me what burdens your heart." Drawing a deep breath, Jake poured out his concerns, the ranch, his mother, the creeping sense of despair that threatened to consume him. He spoke of the corruption that loomed and the tension that consumed their town's essence. With each shared thought, the burdens felt lighter, shifting slightly from his shoulders. As Tomahawk listened, he lifted his chin as if preparing a horse for a long ride. "Every voice deserves to be heard, Jake, but to speak for your ancestors, you must first listen. To them and to your own heart." The words hung in the air, stirring something deep within Jake, a sense of urgency. This wasn't just about his family, it was about a community sidelined by greed and despair. Armed with Tomahawk's belief in him, he could reclaim that voice. But before he could fully grasp his new purpose, a distant shout echoed through the night, shattering their moment. The urgency in the voice felt foreboding, an omen of conflict brewing in the dark. Jake's heart raced as he and Tomahawk exchanged worried glances. The time had come to confront the darkness, to face whatever awaited them head-on. And with it, an awakening of determination surged within Jake, igniting a spark that would not easily extinguish. What had he awakened in himself, and what storm was brewing on the horizon? The shout reverberated through the stillness of the night, echoing off the distant hills. It was a wrenching cry, one that vibrated with urgency and desperation, setting Jake's heart racing. He turned to Tomahawk, whose expression had shifted from contemplative to alert, eyes narrowing as if seeking the source of the chaos. "What was that?" Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Understanding the danger, shouting could herald violence, a skirmish, perhaps a confrontation that would challenge everything he had just resolved to embrace. Tomahawk straightened, scanning the darkness with a focused intensity. "It means we need to find out what's happening. This is not the time to remain passive." Jake felt the weight of the words sink in, an undeniable truth that resonated with the growing determination within him. He had arrived seeking answers about courage. Now, it seemed, fate had chosen to thrust him into the center of it. He nodded, and together they moved toward the source of the shouting, guided by instinct and fear. As they emerged from the camp, the world around them transformed under the moonlight. Shadows danced alongside them, the silhouettes of tree branches stretching like fingers grasping for resolution. Each step felt heavy with anticipation. Jake's thoughts raced. This was his opportunity, a moment that demanded action. They approached the town square, where a small crowd had gathered, faces illuminated by flickering lanterns. The tension was palpable. He could see a figure in the center, hunched over, flanked by others who seemed to be gesturing wildly. "What's going on?" Jake whispered to Tomahawk as they drew closer. "It appears there's been another confrontation," Tomahawk replied, his voice steady, yet low, revealing a hint of concern. "The land is still under dispute, and those who threaten the town are becoming more brazen." Jake's pulse quickened as he spotted familiar faces. Townsfolk who had been his neighbors for years, now embroiled in a struggle against unseen aggressors. The situation felt like a boiling pot about to overflow. Would he show indifference and stand by? Or would he step into the fray, fueled by the conviction that had begun to bloom within him? Another shout arose, this time accompanied by the sight of a man pushing against a barrier made of old wooden crates, enhancing the chaos around him. Without thinking, Jake took a step forward, drawn by an impulse he couldn't quite define. "Jake!" Tomahawk's voice reached him, urgent yet restrained. "Do not act recklessly. We need to understand." But Jake was already moving. His heart hammered as he positioned himself into the throng, instinctually wanting to stand for something, even if it was just one small part of the collective indignation. "What's happening?" he called out, frustration welling within him. "Why are we allowing this to happen again?" The crowd began to respond, voices rising above one another, their anger mingling with fear, all of it crashing against the walls of his defenses. Jake could hear the chatter, illuminating corruption, once hidden, now bubbling to the surface. This wasn't just about him, it was much larger, an upheaval at the root of their lives. Tomahawk's appearance at his side was a grounding force. "Listen," he urged in a low tone. "They are trying to find a solution without violence. We must be careful not to escalate it." Jake fought to temper his eagerness, but felt the surge inside him, a burning desire not just for self-preservation, but for the legacy he longed to uphold. Instinctively, he realized he was inching closer to understanding the power of a voice united with purpose, but the question loomed larger. Did he have the courage to wield it? Each word spoken around him cradled frustration and desperation. Jake was faced with a choice: enter the conflict or return to the safety of indecision. He hesitated, torn between the man he was and the one he aspired to be. But one thing felt certain: the time for silence was fading, and he knew deep down that the next step he took could define everything. As the shouting intensified, the air heavy with impending confrontation, Jake's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was his moment to shape not just his future, but the narrative of those around him. Would he step forward to forge his identity in the chaos before him, or would he retreat, allowing darkness to thrive unchecked? The choice stood before him, stark and raw. And then, a sudden crash sounded, sending a ripple of silence through the crowd, eyes now trained on the new tumult. Jake's resolve hardened. The time had come to confront what awaited him. No more waiting, no more questioning. There would be no turning back now. What would he uncover within himself amidst the turmoil, and how would it change the course of his life? Jake felt the shift in energy as the crowd inhaled deeply in unison, collectively preparing for whatever came next. The sudden crash still echoed in his ears, mingling with the shouts and cries that surrounded him. He took a breath, grounding himself in that moment, clenching his fist to steady the tectonic shift occurring within him. What was it about this chaos that compelled him? It was more than mere solidarity with friends. It was a convergence of resolve, an awakening. He fought back the instinct to retreat, reminding himself of the transformation he sought, one that made the invisible threads of courage palpable. The figure pushing against the barricades was now seated, cradling his head in his hands, oblivious to the swirling tumult that enveloped him. Was this despair what Jake saw in himself? A fear of letting go, of taking the leap into uncertainty? He longed to challenge that paralysis, to find the words that could shift this moment from chaos to clarity. "Tomahawk," he said, needing support, even as determination filled his chest. What if we spoke up? Just a few words among the crowd could change the narrative. Tomahawk nodded, but retreated slightly, maintaining a vigilant stance, still assessing the rising tide of anxious emotions. "You need to understand the stakes, Jake. Words have power, but they can also fuel a fire, especially in volatile moments like this." Jake recognized the weight of that counsel. Yet two paths loomed before him: act, or remain a spectator in his own life. The conflict before him crystallized a deeper battle, the one he faced daily within himself. Pushing through the crowd, he positioned himself near the center of the commotion, adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. All around him, limbs gestured and mouths shouted. He felt a sudden sense of urgency mounting, provoking his need to soothe the chaos rather than exacerbate it. But how? "Listen!" he suddenly shouted above the noise, his voice crackling with newfound authority. The murmur hushed, eyes darting in his direction, not with disdain, but with curiosity. There was an opportunity in that stillness, a flicker of possibility he had never anticipated. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. "We won't solve this through aggression or shouting. We need trust and understanding, a commitment to communicate, or we risk losing everything." He was surprised by his own boldness, by the way the ember of certainty ignited into flames. One man, his brow furrowed, stepped forward. "You think words can fix this? The land is at stake. They don't care about our voices." That challenge struck a chord, beckoning Jake to step deeper into his conviction. "Then let's make them care. Let our voices rise above the anger and reach the ones who can change it." His heart raced as he spoke. He felt something shift inside, the embers sparking into a growing blaze of passion. There was a heartbeat of silence, as though the crowd was weighing his words. Then, like dominoes falling, murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the masses, igniting a small flicker of hope in their eyes. "Maybe," Tomahawk whispered beside him, "maybe you found the courage after all." Jake met Tomahawk's gaze briefly, an unbroken thread of camaraderie between them. But that small ember of hope now appeared to face a torrential storm. The potential for violence still loomed. People were standing at the precipice, their emotions teetering on the edge of conflict. Would his words carry forward, drawing back the burgeoning waves of aggression? Or were they but a whisper against the coming storm? The stakes felt higher than ever, and even as he forged ahead in spirit, Jake suddenly felt an overwhelming weight pressing against his chest, clawing at the nascent confidence he'd barely begun to grasp. As voices began to churn again, Jake recognized that the true trial had only just begun. He had sparked a different kind of fire, but would it be enough to light the way through the dark? The shouts and chaos surrounded him anew, wrapping him in a cloak of uncertainty. The battle for the future had shifted, but for him, one agonizing truth remained. The hardest fight would not be with the ones outside, but with the seeds of doubt still within. What would he need to confront within himself to carry this moment forward into truth? The urge to anchor himself was strong, yet the temptation of retreat still lingered just beneath the surface, threading through him as he stood amid the growing storm. The roar of the crowd ricocheted off the walls of Jake's mind, drowning out the doubt that threatened to take root. Each shout blurred into a cacophony, while Jake pushed against the current, battling rising apprehension with fervor. The faces around him blurred, a collection of hopes and fears intertwined in a collective zeitgeist. Whatever their shared struggles, Jake knew they were about to face the hardest challenge yet. Beyond the chaos, beyond the immediate dangers, a deeper reckoning awaited within him. "Can they feel this as I do?" Jake pondered. He fought to find his footing, but the ground felt both solid and treacherous underfoot. The stakes were high. He had already put himself out there, vulnerable yet resolute. "I've taken a leap, but where does it lead?" As another wave of restless energy surged, he fought to hold on to the clarity that flickered inside him. Courage was no longer just a response, but a part of his identity, and perhaps his purpose. If he faltered now, what kind of man would he be? Would he revert to comfortable silence, the safety of inaction? "Speak," his mind pressed him as he felt the pressure of hesitation clamp down around his throat. Peering into the eyes of the man who had called him out, Jake saw a reflection of his struggle, uncertainty woven with heartache. "What if I'm not equipped to help?" the man's glare seemed to ask. "No," Jake whispered to himself. He was prepared to confront that vulnerability head-on. "What if I can be?" He realized then that it wasn't about having all the answers or being untouchable, it was about connection. He had to share his warmth, radiate from the sparks igniting within his soul. "What if," he thought, "my vulnerability provides the grounding they need? Let's find a way forward together," he called, the confidence in his voice thickening. "If we stand here divided, we lose to the forces that want us powerless. But together, our words, our stories, can weave a different reality. We have to listen and act as one." With every word, he felt the bond of interconnectedness solidifying across the mass before him. He could see skepticism melting away as people exchanged glances filled with understanding. In that moment, Jake discovered resilience might lie in honesty, in admitting uncertainty while forging ahead together. "Who will stand with us?" Jake challenged the crowd, hoping that his image of unity would take root. He locked eyes with the man who had called him out, refusing to back down. The challenge now lay in the connection he had ignited. Gradually, hands raised hesitantly, faces glanced nervously between one another. Jake could sense the underlying hope bridged by uncertainty, teetering on the edge between action and status quo. They needed a leader, but he was beginning to recognize they were not here for him alone. They were searching, yearning for a new path. Just then, a woman's voice emerged from the back, low but fierce. "What if we fail?" "What if we do?" Jake instinctively shot back. "But what if we don't?" Doubt skimmed across the crowd again, but this time he stepped deeper, feeling the urgency pulse through him. "Failure can't be the end. What makes us truly great is how we rise after each fall." The ripple of agreement was slow at first, but grew stronger like a wildfire spreading through dry grass. Jake felt its warmth, remembering for a fleeting moment the paralyzing fear he had wrestled with before stepping into this role. This time, he would climb higher than before, fueled by the very uncertainty that had once chained him. "Face your fears," a whisper echoed in his mind, "but also face the strength within." Jake turned to Tomahawk once more, whose steady gaze reaffirmed their bond, but that steady resolve shifted to concern as he gestured for Jake to look at something unfolding in the crowd. The tension had again begun to spiral. The shouts intensified, emboldened by Jake's call. Yet something darker was rising. A faction from the edge of the crowd screamed far louder, seeking to drown out the progress they had made. Was the awakening he had catalyzed worth this swell of aggression? Was this the price of courage? As Jake felt adrenaline swim through him, he realized the battle was not over. In fact, it was escalating. The moment had come to confront not just the forces at work outside, but also the fire that burned behind the eyes of his inexplicably resistant crowd. Would he have the courage to stand firm, to evolve into the champion they needed? Or was he merely a whisper against the mounting storm? Time to commit, he thought, a fervent determination now igniting his soul. As voices rose against him, he braced to face the ultimatum standing at the precipice of this chaotic moment. What price was he willing to pay for change? Jake's heart raced, the thrum of uncertainty escalating in time with the crowd's mounting tension. As chaos reigned around him, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was not just a momentary challenge, it was a pivot point in his life. The opposition was rising, but so too was the relentless tide of his own determination. A primal scream from the back forced his thoughts away from contemplation and onto reaction. It was a voice of anger, a bellow that sought to push everyone back into the shadows of compliance. He couldn't let that happen. He could no longer be the silent observer. He had to embody the change he wanted to see. "What do you want from us?" shouted a figure near the front, throwing a metaphorical gauntlet at Jake's feet. "You, who dares to speak of unity, tell us what you plan to do when it all goes south." Jake felt the creeping tendrils of doubt grasp at his resolve. He understood the skepticism. In his own mind, questions swirled like a storm cloud, but with every breath he took, he refocused on the collective heartbeat of the crowd. Deep down, he sensed an uncharted strength within himself, an unyielding whisper promising clarity and conviction. "Freedom," he shouted, his voice sharp and unyielding amid the rising discontent. Freedom to choose our own path without fear of dissent. Each word resonated through the air, ushering in a moment of unexpected stillness. The anger for an instant seemed to hold its breath, as if considering Jake's proposition. He allowed a fleeting sense of empowerment to wash over him, his vulnerability becoming a beacon for the same uncertainty wrapped up in those faces around him. "Listen," he implored, scanning the crowd. "I don't have all the answers, but together we can discover them. What we face isn't just about today or tomorrow, it's about the legacy we leave behind, about forging a truth that unites rather than divides." The subtle swell of agreement pierced the disillusionment. He saw nods, an inkling of unity blossoming from the depths of doubt. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a spark. "What do we want?" he pressed. "Change," they shouted back as if trying to reclaim some agency from the raging chaos outside. "And what are we willing to do for it?" Silence fell again, but this time it was pregnant with potential. Jake could feel the collective pressure building, could almost taste the urgency electrifying the air. "I know we're scared. I know we've been conditioned to expect failure, but there's a fire in each of us. It's time to let it burn." As he spoke, he noticed a shift, the faces around him reflecting the flickering hope that had begun to rise. They were looking at him, not just for direction, but for reassurance. They didn't require him to be a flawless leader. They simply yearned for authenticity in a world painted with preconceived notions of defeat. Jake straightened his shoulders, the resolve within him hardened like steel. "If we fail, it doesn't define us. It's how we rise that matters. Together we can choose to stand tall, face the fears clawing at our insides, and emerge transformed." With renewed energy, the crowd began to echo the sentiment, voices rising in a resounding chorus that chased the shadows away. Yet, in the backdrop of this growing support, an unsettling thought gnawed at the edges of Jake's burgeoning optimism. The rising anger he had sensed, where had it drawn its strength? All at once, a silhouette emerged from the periphery, its stark form unmistakably hostile. Someone from the opposing faction who had, until now, hidden in the margins of this moment. Jake's heart sank as he locked eyes with the newcomer, the tension reigniting around him. Moments earlier, he had found a glimmer of clarity and strength, but now the stakes were morphing into something darker. Would this confrontation yield the answer, or would it lead to a reckoning he wasn't prepared for? The air thickened, charged with uncertainty, as Jake realized the next pivotal challenge lay not only within the crowd's acceptance of his message, but in the confrontation inching ever closer. Would he navigate this storm, or be swept away? Jake's eyes narrowed as he tracked the figure advancing from the edges of the crowd, a storm of emotions brewing within him. This was not merely a challenger, it was a harbinger of the very fears he had just begun to confront. The hard gaze of the newcomer pierced through the moment, shifting the atmosphere from hope to foreboding in an instant. This wasn't a random opposition, it was a calculated move meant to unearth his vulnerabilities. "Jake!" the figure shouted, igniting the air with a challenge. "What makes you think you can lead? You think words will change anything? You're just another voice in the chaos." Each accusation landed with the weight of a sledgehammer, and for a fleeting second, doubt wafted through him. Had he truly misread the aspirations of the crowd? Were his own ambitions nothing more than empty rhetoric? He took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins, pushing aside the specter of uncertainty clawing at his mind. "What do you offer that's different?" the opponent pressed, his voice slicing through the noise around them. "Your dreams are just that, dreams. They hold no power against the reality we live in." In that moment, a wave of clarity washed over Jake. He wasn't just talking to the crowd, he was in an arena where every word counted against his own self-doubt. He turned to face his opponent, determination igniting his voice. "I'm here because change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from facing hard truths, and I'm willing to embrace us as we are, imperfections and all." Jake's speech echoed in the silence that followed, the crowd alive with anticipation. Conflicting emotions played across their faces: fear, frustration, a yearning for change, and most crucially, hope. Each heartbeat was a reminder of their shared passion, and Jake became aware of an unexpected talent flickering within him, the ability to inspire even amid fierce resistance. "Look around you," he continued, gesturing towards the faces that had been wavering in uncertainty. We are not a performance, we are a living testament to resilience. If you believe we are powerless, then we have already lost the battle. But I see warriors among us, individuals not defined by struggle but forged by it. As he spoke, the intensity in the air began to shift. Some in the crowd clenched their fists, others lifted their heads higher, and a few even shouted affirmations, reigniting the energy that had begun to wane. The adversary, however, cast a shadow over this precious momentum. "Sounds great, Jake," the antagonist scoffed. "But when push comes to shove, when the world doesn't offer you a podium or an audience, what will you do? What will you fight for if no one cares?" Those words twisted painfully in Jake's stomach. Who would care? He had felt it, the despair of loneliness creeping through the spaces where unity should thrive. The confrontation with his opponent was inherently a reflection of his inner battle, revealing an unsettling truth about his perceptions and commitments. "I choose to fight for this moment, right here, right now," he declared, the weight of those words anchoring him in conviction. "Because if it matters to even one of us, then it matters to all of us, and together we can soar to places we've never dreamed." The tension crackled in the air like static electricity. The crowd was now a tapestry of emotions, but Jake was no longer afraid. He embraced the chaos around him, letting it fuel his conviction. After all, this was more than a rallying cry. It was a declaration of his own fight against doubt and the oppressive forces that thrived on fear. The challenger stepped closer, something akin to respect threading through his scorn. "Then let's see how deep your conviction runs, Jake. Let's see if you're willing to back it up with actions, not just words." Jake's heart raced, realizing that this moment wasn't just a test of his leadership. It was a plunge into uncharted depths of his own capabilities, a call to action that demanded a response. And as his gaze pierced through the murky chaos, he recognized that his path forward wouldn't be simply navigating external conflict, but unraveling the layers of his own evolving identity. Would he rise to the challenge or falter before it? The answer was tantalizingly close, hovering just out of reach as he prepared to confront not only his opponent, but the very essence of who he aspired to be, triggering a reckoning far greater than any words spoken aloud could capture. Jake stood solidly amidst the tumult, the weight of those sharp words pressing down on him like an anvil. The anticipation swirling in the crowd wasn't just about him. It pulsed with a collective heartbeat, each rhythm echoing his own fears and aspirations. Every passerby's gaze now rested on him, expectant, and in that moment, Jake felt pinned beneath the spotlight of his own making. What did conviction mean if it was merely a performance? He sensed the adversary's challenge gnawing at him. The test wasn't only about standing strong in front of the people, it was a profound interrogation of his resolve. For too long, he had spoken of dreams, yet how would he follow through in the face of doubt? There's nothing quite so crippling as self-scrutiny, he thought. It wrapped itself around him, squeezing out the very air he needed. The thrumming pulse of the crowd began to falter, and he needed a strategy. Words alone wouldn't suffice to sway his opponent or the lingering resentment among the people around him. He looked out, confronting more than just the figure before him. The challenge lay in finding a way to transform the energy in the air into positive action. How could he translate ideation into reality? The crowd was expecting a leader, but what he found was a deep reservoir of fear tugging at his gut. Jake made a mental shift, recalling every mentor who had ever ignited a spark within him and leaning on their voices for guidance. "What if we begin by taking steps?" he proposed, his voice steadying with intention. "What if today we make a commitment to ourselves, to every one of us here?" The tension hung thick, but he pressed on, instinctively recognizing that opening a dialogue was vital. "Let's not think of this as merely a gathering. Let's think partnerships, actionable ideas. We have too long waited for someone to bring change to us," he proclaimed, igniting a flicker of interest in some faces. His opponent crossed his arms defiantly. "And what's your plan, Jake? Words won't fill bellies or fix homes." Jake's mind spun. He was caught in an entanglement of thoughts, scrambling to navigate through the fog. "Action," he repeated, more as an incantation. "Starting with us, we create initiatives, we organize drives, we bring in resources." This was the threshold, the moment where he either stepped into his potential or drifted into obscurity. The knot in his stomach loosened, the crowd shifting slightly back toward him as they began to react. But how? A voice piped up from the crowd, innocent, seeking clarity. Jake inhaled deeply, collecting his swirling ideas. It doesn't have to start grand. It can begin with small acts. Find your neighbor, offer help, reach out. Let's form a network, a unity of purpose. Anything is achievable, together. He watched as realization dawned in some eyes, and others began to nod cautiously. It was no longer just about him standing alone. It was igniting a collective spark, a flicker of hope that reverberated against despair. Each spark represented a commitment that altered his trajectory, reaching toward a path defined by mutual support rather than solitary effort. As he spoke, every syllable dripped with a newfound strength, each sentence building a bridge over the chasm of doubt that had previously threatened to drown out his potential. He could see in the faces around him that they were beginning to understand. If they harnessed their obstacles, transformation could occur, not just in terms of resources but in spirit. However, the opponent wouldn't let it rest. You think that's enough? Initiatives and talk? What about the real struggles? What are you going to do? Jake's heart thundered. It wasn't enough to only respond with future aspirations. He needed to confront his present reality as well. I recognize the struggles. I'm challenging myself to address them, not just discuss. The dynamic between them shifted subtly, his resolve knitting a thin thread of respect into the tension. The crowd awaited his next move, poised on the precipice of belief, yet teetering on disbelief. Jake knew that stepping outside the crowd's expectations would demand everything he had, but he also discovered what lay underneath the fear, an electrifying current of determination that sparked an urge to act. So much rode on this moment. As the sun dipped lower, casting shadows that stretched across the ground, Jake's pulse quickened with anticipation. The time had come to solidify his ideas into tangible actions, holding fast to the convictions he had just begun to embrace. Yet as he prepared for the next gesture, the challenge resisting was evolving. It was ever present at the edge of his resolve. If he dared to step beyond mere words, he would have to enter a proving ground far less forgiving, one that tested not only his ideas but the depths of his character. He faced his opponent, a silent agreement passing between them. The stakes had just been raised, and while Jake felt ready, the path ahead promised to be tumultuous. What profound transformation awaited him if he dared to journey deeper into action? Would he finally confront what lurked behind the facade of success? Jake's heart surged with adrenaline as he faced the restless crowd, each pulsating gaze urging him to translate words into something real. The skepticism lingering in the air was palpable, but beneath that sat an undercurrent of hope, a flickering flame that he could fan into existence. What if he couldn't? The thought wormed its way into his mind like an unwelcome guest, its whispers echoing deep-rooted fears. But another voice emerged, louder and insistent. This was his moment, a chance to manifest the change he had always envisioned. He straightened himself, his posture firm and resolute, drawing on the resolve he had felt earlier. "So here's what I propose," he continued, his voice steadying with each word. "Let's meet. Let's carve out time together to brainstorm these actions and get to the heart of what truly matters. Each of you has stories, insights. Together we can build a map toward a better tomorrow." The energy in the crowd shifted as murmurs spread like ripples through water. People leaned in slightly, intrigued by the idea of collaboration over conflict. Jake's own uncertainty bubbled just beneath the surface. He had never been good at teamwork, preferring the solitary journey of self-reliance. Yet today felt different. Today, he needed to break the habit of isolation. "And let's address the pressing challenges, real solutions," he asserted, directing his gaze toward his opponent, who no longer appeared as formidable. Instead, Jake saw a skilled adversary who demanded accountability, one who ultimately provided an opportunity for him to solidify his perspectives. "Let's create small teams focused on specific issues, whether it's food shortages, housing, or education. We can leverage existing resources, tap into local businesses, and tackle these problems head-on." The opponent uncrossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "And who leads these teams? You? What makes you different?" The question was a thorn under his skin, enveloped by an urgency to prove himself. "I have no special title or privileges," he replied, testing the very metal of his resolve. But I'm willing to step back when necessary and let others lead. It's about empowering individuals to share their skills, not about who stands at the front. The crowd shifted, more intrigued than before. Jake felt his confidence swell. He was not merely selling them a dream but offering them a shared platform. His heart raced, not with fear but excitement. As he spoke, images of his past mentors filled his mind, their lessons intermixed with their passions and triumphs. He had learned that true leadership didn't dwell in authority, but thrived in collaboration and mentorship. He wanted to embody that. Let's gather not just for discussions but for results. A meeting of minds, yes, but also a gathering of hands ready to work. Each contribution, no matter how small, creates a mosaic of change, Jake declared, his words resonating deeply. He felt his potential ignite like a flash flood, a dazzling certainty that surged within him. This was his chance to uproot the self-doubt that had shadowed his every ambition. With that clarity came the recognition of his own capabilities, the unique talents hidden beneath layers of apprehension and fear. He could guide, he could listen, he could execute when necessary. Each revelation pushed him further into a world that had always seemed perilously out of reach. But as the crowd began to stir with a hint of goodwill, the tension returned, more insistent than before. What if the commitment he sought was merely a fantasy? Or worse, what if he stumbled in his attempts when the time came to turn thought into action? Jake clenched his fists, determination bubbling within him like an effervescent tide crashing against a craggy shore. To hesitate now would be to betray everything he had just built. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, to risk exposing himself in pursuit of his objectives. Yet simmering beneath the surface was a deeper truth. How would he handle failure if it arrived at his doorstep, uninvited and disarming? Would he retract back into safety, or meet it head-on? The crowd's energy grew, casting Jake as their reluctant beacon, illuminating his path into the unknown. Each heartbeat reminded him that cities had been built on blunders, yet those failures birthed the kind of innovation that could not be extinguished. As he prepared to delve deeper into the unfolding opportunity, a weight pressed down, unyielding and palpable. What doors would he open? Which paths might he have to tread alone, even in a world filled with potential partnerships? The moment was electric and fraught with uncertainty, pregnant with potential. Jake squared his shoulders, ready to plunge into the burgeoning tide of possibility, but a nagging thought persisted. Would he emerge whole, or would the journey unravel him in ways he couldn't possibly foresee? Jake stood resolute in the town square, the once chaotic scene morphing into a tapestry of collective purpose woven from threads of individual resolve. The echoes of doubt that had plagued his earlier speeches had faded into a powerful clarity. Here and now, he would not only fight for his vision, but for the very essence of his identity, a burgeoning leader forged in the crucible of conflict. Days turned into weeks as the people rallied around Jake's vision, transforming their whispers of hope into tangible efforts. They convened every Saturday, developing actionable plans to address food scarcity, shelter, and education. Among the numerous initiatives birthed from these meetings was a community garden, an oasis of sustenance born of arid fear and uncertainty. With each seed sown, Jake felt a profound change rooting itself deep within both himself and his neighbors. One evening, as he toiled alongside Tomahawk in the community garden, Jake marveled at how simple acts of solidarity had cemented the foundation of a more robust community. Tomahawk's laughter echoed through the rows of vegetables, the sound a testament to their shared resilience. "I never imagined this," Jake admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This garden symbolizes more than food. It's a manifestation of what we can achieve together." Tomahawk met his gaze, eyes twinkling with wisdom. "It is the soil of connection, Jake. Remember, in nurturing this land, you nurture your spirit." A deep sense of fulfillment washed over Jake. He had crossed the threshold from feeling lost and overwhelmed to standing as a catalyst for transformation, something far beyond mere cattle ranching. The self-imposed shackles that had kept him shackled to doubt had shattered, leaving behind a newfound confidence. By embracing vulnerability, Jake had ignited a fire not only within himself but throughout the community, and his conviction now shone bright like a beacon. Each initiative undertaken was a testament to collective empowerment, showcasing that vulnerability could foster profound strength. Yet he knew the journey would not end here. The local newspaper had picked up on their progress and was set to feature their story. Amidst the euphoria, Jake felt the rising tide of anxiety re-emerging. What would it mean to be in the spotlight? Would the glory hold up against the harsh light of scrutiny? But crushed beneath those feelings lay a restructured resilience. Jake had learned that with every challenge came the opportunity for growth, and the impending write-up wasn't merely an accolade, it was a chance to inspire others. It was time to show the world that community could rise from adversity. On the day of the article's release, Jake found himself at the local cafe, newspapers lying stacked on the newsstand like proud sentinels. As readers poured in, whispers began to fill the air, curiosity spreading like wildfire. He could overhear snippets of conversations, people discussing their own hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Upon reading about the community garden and Jake's leadership, many came forward seeking to join. Hope had transformed into action, adventure manifesting as teamwork, and Jake realized he was not merely a participant, but an architect of change. As he walked through the bustling crowd that day, a familiar figure approached him, a woman from the opposing faction, her arms crossed defensively. Jake braced himself, expecting contention, yet what unfolded brought him to the brink of disbelief. "I read the article," she began slowly, her posture softening. "You're not what I expected. Maybe there is something to this connection you're creating. Perhaps I misjudged you." Jake felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for what they had collectively achieved. "Thank you. Let's work together then. Each of us has something to contribute. The stakes are too high to divide ourselves further." Their discussion opened doors for more individuals as conversations flourished around him. It became a cascade of mutually beneficial dialogues, an evolution that spiraled outward like branches of a mighty oak reaching skyward. Days faded into weeks, and Jake found himself on the cusp of something monumental. As he spoke at town hall meetings, advocating for resolutions that would benefit not only their immediate community, but their histories steeped in forgotten narratives, he flourished. At each event, he embraced the storyteller within, weaving tales that connected the fabric of the past with the promise of a united future. Jake's growth resonated beyond his personal ambitions and the legacy of his ranch. It served as a springboard inspiring others. Families reclaimed their dignity. The environment began to heal, and shattered trust transformed into steadfast bridges of collaboration. And as sunlight poured into his life each morning, washing over the garden that now thrived on what had once been barren land, Jake felt certain of one thing. He was no longer tethered by fear or self-doubt. He had achieved not just personal growth, but a collective evolution, a legacy interlaced with truth and integrity. With pride blooming bright in his chest, Jake recognized how crucial it had been to let go of old narratives. He had uncoupled himself from the isolation of his past and learned to lead with compassion and authenticity. Standing in the garden, surrounded by life and connection, Jake finally felt he had arrived. At peace with his purpose, now emerged a question for him. What would be the next chapter of this transformed narrative, and how would he continue to nurture both the land and the bonds he had forged? It was a question worth pondering, but for now, he knew the answer lay ahead, blooming with perfection just like the vibrant flowers nearly bursting with life. If Jake had learned anything through this incredible journey, it was that he was capable of greatness, a life dedicated to growth, to integrity, and to fighting for change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had lent him their strength. Now, as an accomplished leader, he stood ready to take on whatever challenges awaited his community. If you connected with Jake's journey, you need to subscribe now to the channel for more exclusive emotional stories. Here's your chance to show your support. Leave a like to help feed the algorithm that brings these tales to life. Don't hesitate. Comment your reactions and theories about Jake's incredible transformation. Share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion. Together, let's uplift the stories of personal overcoming. Don't wait even one more second.